The radio was talking about a storm coming up out of the Caribbean. It sat on top of the icebox, a brown plastic Philco running on a battery because the power had been out since Monday. Clarence sat at the kitchen table. His brother Myers sat beside him, 5 years old, waiting. A kerosene lamp stood between them, the flame low. Their great-aunt turned hominy at the wood stove with her back to them. Outside the window, the sky had gone the color of lead. A truck pulled into the yard. The engine cut. Boots on dirt. The screen door creaked and shut, and a man crossed the front room into the kitchen behind them. Clarence did not turn. He knew the floorboards. Hands came down on the back of his chair, big hands, the knuckles scarred where the oil line couplings had bitten them. Radio's calling it a hurricane. It is. The great-aunt brought 2 tin plates, hominy and a piece of fatback. She set one in front of Clarence and one in front of Myers. She did not set one in front of the man. He sat down across from them and folded his hands on the table. I'm taking them up to Savannah in the morning. Can't manage them down here no more. Not with this weather. A silence. It settled. She turned back to the stove. Boy, the man said. Clarence. He looked up. He did not see the face. The lamp threw the light upward, and the man across the table was a silhouette, a suspender, a shoulder, a jaw in shadow, the hands folded on the wood. We ain't got no education. Me and your grandmother. We ain't got no chance at what's out there. You all are going to have a chance. You understand me? Yes, sir. You'll have it because I'll see that you have it. You will not waste it. You will not lay it down. If I see you lay it down, I will take it from you and give it to somebody who won't. You understand, boy? Yes, sir. Eat. Clarence ate. In the morning, the oil truck carried them up the coast to the house on East 32nd Street. The man had not asked him whether he wanted to go. The field was 40 acres of red clay the grandfather had bought off a white farmer who thought the soil was done and sold it for less than the fence around it. Dawn. October 1958. Clarence stood at the edge of the eastern section in his brother's old overalls, a tin water jug already cutting into his hand. In front of him was the tractor, a Massey Harris 101, rust where the green paint had been, kept running 3 years on parts the grandfather forged himself. The grandfather stood beside it. You ever run this alone? No, sir. You ever watched me run it? Yes, sir. Every summer. Then you know it. His hand came up, the palm with the old coupling scar across it, and pointed. 300 yards east, a wooden stake with a strip of red cloth hung limp in the still air. Past it, at the farthest edge of the section, a second stake, another red strip. Your row runs between them. You set your eye on the far one. You do not set your eye on the near one. The near one will make you snake. The far one will make you true. He turned to go. When you come back, that furrow better run as clean as if a surveyor laid it. A job worth doing is worth doing right. He walked to the fence line, sat down on a stump, and filled a pipe. The boy climbed onto the tractor. His boots did not reach the pedals. The grandfather had welded raw steel blocks onto the clutch and brake the week before. He turned the key. The engine caught. He set his eye on the far stake. He let the clutch out, and the tractor moved, and the plow bit the ground behind him. He could not see the furrow from the seat. He could only feel the drag, and the grandfather had told him that a man who watches his plow is a man who is going to crook his row. So he did not watch the plow. He watched the stake. The near stake passed under his front wheel, and he did not look at it. Sweat ran into his eye, and he did not wipe it. He held the far stake the way he had been told to hold it, and he did not let go. The field ended. He turned the tractor in the wide arc he had been taught and stopped, and made himself look only at the last 20 yards. They were straight. Then he looked at the whole row. The grandfather was walking it. He had come off the stump, and he was walking the 300 yards in the furrow itself, slow, his head down, reading the cut. Twice he stopped and put his hand flat on the turned clay. At the end, at the stake where the tractor stood, he took the pipe out of his mouth. He looked at the furrow. He looked at the boy. He nodded once. He did not say anything. He turned and walked back to the stump. Clarence put the tractor in gear, set his eye on the far stake of the second row, and cut the second furrow of his life into the red ground of Liberty County, Georgia. Conception, Missouri sat in the northwestern corner of the state, where the land rolled and the sky was bigger than it should have been. The seminary had been built by Benedictines out of brick, the color of dried blood. In April 1968, Clarence Thomas was 19 and had been there since September. He was the only black man in his class. He was the only black man in the building. That evening, after dinner, the first-year men gathered in the common room. A radio on a side table had been turned on for the weather. Instead of weather, it was playing bulletins. Memphis, a motel, a shot from across the street. The room got quiet. Clarence stood by the radiator with his breviary open in his hand. The announcer said Dr. King had been taken to the hospital in critical condition. 10 minutes later, he came back and said Dr. King had been pronounced dead. Nobody in the common room spoke. A man came down the corridor from the stairs. Clarence knew him by the sound of his walk, the heels striking the wood hard. He came to the door of the common room and did not come in. He looked at the radio and he looked at the man in the room and he said one word. Good. There was a pause. I hope he dies. The radio had already said that he had died. Nobody in the room spoke. Clarence looked at the floor. The floor was pine and had been waxed that morning, and his reflection was in the wax. The man moved on down the corridor. A door opened and shut. Someone cleared his throat. The man in the room spoke slowly about the weather. Clarence walked out. He climbed to the third floor and stopped on the landing at the window that looked east over the prairie. The sun had set. A single light showed where a farmhouse stood 7 miles off. He put his palm to the cold glass and held it there. He went to his room. He took his mother's cardboard suitcase from under the bed, the handle wrapped in tape gone soft. He packed his shirts and his pants. He wound the rosary around his hand and put it in his pocket. He laid the pictures of his grandmother and his brother face down on top of the clothes. He did not take the breviary. He did not take the crucifix. He shut the suitcase and latched it, and sat on the edge of the bed and watched his hands tremble and watched them stop. He carried the suitcase out through the side door into the cold. At the road, he turned once and looked back. The brick in the moonlight was the color of old rust. A light burned in the second-floor window where the common room was. He turned and walked south. He did not come back. The bus from Boston to Worcester ran at dawn for the kids who had gotten themselves into something they did not want to bring home. Clarence rode the dawn bus. His right hand was wrapped in a blue bandana that had been cleaned the afternoon before. Under it, 2 knuckles had split. The march had started at Harvard Yard. He had gone to Cambridge with 6 men from the Black Student Union. By dark, it was not a march. A cop swung a baton at a kid in front of him, and Clarence went forward and put his own body between the baton and the kid, and the cop did not swing again. Somebody threw a brick through a bank window. A boy he did not know put a fist through the side of a parked car, and Clarence went forward and put his own fists through the glass of the driver's window. He did not stop. He did not know how. The glass split 2 knuckles. He did not know what had happened to the kid with the baton. The bus reached Worcester before 5 in the morning. He got off and walked south through the empty city and up College Hill. At the top, the campus lay out in the gray light. On his left, set back from the drive, was the chapel, St. Joseph Memorial Chapel. Stone, a low steeple, doors at the top of a short flight of granite steps. A lamp above the doors had burned through the night and was burning still. He stopped at the foot of the steps. He had walked past this chapel every morning for 19 months and had not gone in once. He had passed it on his way to class, on his way to the meetings, on his way to the bus he had ridden to Cambridge the afternoon before. He had not looked at the doors. He looked at the doors now. They did not open. He did not open them. His right hand came up to the stone railing. The stone was colder than the air. He pressed his palm flat against it. He said something. He said it under his breath. He said it once. He said it to nobody he could see. Lord, take hate out of my heart. The words went nowhere. No one heard them. The lamp above the doors burned. A crow called from the tree line. The sun came up a little further over Worcester. He took his hand off the railing. He did not go into the chapel. He walked past it across the quad to his room. His roommate was asleep. He sat on the edge of his bed in his jacket and his boots, unwrapped the bandana, looked at the split knuckles, and wrapped the hand again. Outside the window, the sun came up. The letter came in November of 1971. It was addressed in the grandfather's hand. Thick pencil, leaning right, each letter gone over twice where the lead had gotten dull. Clarence was at Yale. He took the letter out of the mailbox and looked at it and did not open it. He carried it up to his room and set it on the desk and weighted it with a cold cup of coffee. He studied torts until 2 in the morning and went to bed and did not open the letter. It was still on the desk in January. It was still on the desk in May when he packed the desk into the trunk of a borrowed Pinto and drove west. He went to work for the Attorney General's office in Jefferson City and put the letter in the bottom drawer of the desk. John Danforth came into his office one afternoon, sat on the corner of the desk, and asked what he was working on. Clarence told him. Danforth looked at him a long second and said, "You know the thing I like about you, Clarence. You don't talk unless there's something to say." He got off the desk and left. The letter stayed in the drawer. He went to Monsanto and did agricultural chemical litigation for 2 years. He did not tell anyone where he had gone to law school. He did not tell anyone where he was from. When Danforth went to the Senate and called him to Washington, he went, and the letter came with him in a cardboard box and went on the top shelf of a closet behind a duffel bag of winter clothes. One night in January of 1981, the phone rang. A man said the incoming administration was looking at him to run civil rights at the Department of Education. Clarence said he would think about it and hung up. He took the box down from the shelf. He set it on the bed. He opened the flaps and looked at the letter. He looked at it for a full minute. The grandfather's handwriting had faded a little in the 10 years since New Haven. He closed the flaps. He put the box back on the shelf. In the morning, he called the man back and said yes. The letter stayed in the box. The EEOC occupied 2 floors of a building on L Street. Clarence Thomas became chairman on May 6, 1982. The first morning, he found a stack of pending cases 3 feet high on his desk. He lifted the top folder and opened it. It held the case of a black woman in Tupelo who had been passed over for a promotion at the sewing plant where she had worked 11 years. The white woman who got it had worked there too. He read the file for 40 minutes. He picked up the phone. The call came on the morning of March 30th, 1983. His sister, Emma May, said, "He is gone." He did not ask who. The funeral was at St. Benedict the Moor. The casket was pine, built by a carpenter in Liberty County who had known the grandfather 40 years and did not charge the grandmother for the wood. After the service, Clarence drove alone to the house on East 32nd Street and let himself in with the key the grandmother had given him in 1968. The house was empty. He stood at the kitchen table. He took off his coat. From the inside breast pocket, he took the envelope. He had carried it for 11 years and 4 months. He sat at the table. He slit the envelope with his thumbnail. He removed the single sheet folded inside. He read it. He read it again. He folded it and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope back in the inside pocket of his coat. He sat at the table for a long time. The clock above the wood stove ticked. In the morning, he flew back to Washington. The following week, the Washington Post ran an op-ed calling him a sellout. He read it twice and put the newspaper in the trash can under his desk. The woman in Tupelo got her promotion in June of 1984. Clarence called her from his office and told her, and she said, "I knew the Lord would make a way," and he said, "Yes, ma'am," and hung up and did not tell anyone he had called her. He met Virginia Lamp at a conference in 1986. She was from Nebraska. She laughed at a joke he made about a fire escape. He married her in Omaha the next spring. The stack on his desk never got below 2 feet. Every morning he started at the top and read until lunch. Every afternoon he started at the top and read until 6. He stayed 8 years. In the summer of 1989, a man from the White House called and said the president was considering him for the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. He looked at the stack of folders, 2 feet 2 inches high. It had been 2 feet 2 inches the morning he walked in. The folders changed. The stack did not. He accepted the nomination. The Senate confirmed him to the D.C. Circuit by voice vote in March of 1990. No one objected. He took the oath with his wife holding the Bible. The clerk handed him the robe. The robe was heavier than he had expected. Judge Lawrence Silberman had the chambers 3 doors down. He was 64 and wore a bow tie every day. He found Clarence in the law library on a Thursday afternoon, pulled out the chair across the table and sat down. "You're going to be on the court in 2 years." Clarence looked up. "Sir?" "I said what I said." "The Supreme Court?" "Yes." "I have been on this court for 31 days. "I know that." Silberman folded his hands on the table. "I want you to listen to me, Clarence. There is one question you need to answer before that call comes. The call is going to come. It will come on an ordinary day. You will have 5 minutes. You will not have time to think about anything you have not already thought about." "Yes, sir." "The question is this." Silberman leaned back. "What are you afraid of?" Clarence did not answer. "I'll leave you to it." Silberman stood, pushed in the chair, and walked out of the library. Clarence sat at the table with the legal pad in front of him. He set down his pen. He looked at his hand. He wrote nothing. The call came on a Sunday at the end of June of 1991. He was on the deck of his brother-in-law's house on the Chesapeake with a fishing reel in his lap. His wife handed him the phone. A voice said, "The president would like to see you." He set the reel down and walked to the end of the dock and looked at the water. A gull crossed from the eastern shore to the western shore and did not stop. He said, "Yes, sir." He hung up. He walked back and told his wife. She said, "Are you ready?" He watched the boats on the bay. He looked at her. "No," he said. "Who would be?" she said. They flew to Kennebunkport on the morning of the 1st of July. The house sat on the point. Gray shingle, white trim, a picket fence where the rocks went down to the water. The staff had set up a lectern on the lawn and a rope line held the press back. The president came out in a blue blazer and a red tie, shook Clarence's hand and said, "I'm glad you're here." Clarence said, "Yes, sir." The president stepped to the lectern and said this was the best person for the job. He said his name. Clarence took the lectern. He had a page of notes in his pocket. He did not take it out. He looked past the press at the sea. He said he had come a long way from where he had started. A sharecropper's grandson from Pinpoint, Georgia. He said, "My grandparents, Myers and Christine Anderson, raised me." He said they were the strongest. He stopped. He did not continue the sentence. He looked down at the lectern. He wiped his left eye with the back of his hand. He looked up. He said, "Only in America could this have been possible." He finished. He stepped back. The president came up beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. Clarence did not look at him. He was looking at a boat out on the water, a small white boat with a single sail, the sail up but slack, the boat not moving, no one on the deck that he could see. On the flight back, Virginia held his hand. After a while, she said, "They'll come at you," he said, "I know it." She said, "Are you afraid?" He said nothing. She did not press him. At the descent into Andrews, he said, "Yes." That night in the house in Virginia, he could not sleep. He got out of bed at 2 and went to the kitchen and did not turn on the light. From the inside breast pocket of the coat hanging on the back of a chair, he took the envelope. The slit he had made with his thumbnail 8 years before was still clean. The flap had never been folded back down. He had been carrying it open. He held it in his hand. He put it back in the coat. He went to bed. He lay on his back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and waited for morning. The hearing was in the Russell Senate Office Building, Caucus Room 325. A press gallery, a public gallery, 3 rows of cameras. The first round opened on the 10th of September. He sat at the table 8 hours a day for 5 days. His wife sat behind him in the second row. She wore blue. She did not speak. When he stood up, she stood up. When he sat down, she sat down. The questions were about natural law. The questions were about abortion. He answered what he would answer and did not answer what he would not. The chairman of the committee, a man from Delaware with a long face, ran the clock. On the 27th of September, the committee deadlocked 7-7. On the 1st of October, the Senate set the floor vote for the 8th. On the 6th of October, at 6 in the morning, Newsday published a story. By 8, NPR had it. By noon, the nominee's office had the file. The file contained an affidavit from a Yale-educated black woman who had worked for him at the EEOC. She said he had harassed her at the agency. She said he had talked about a pubic hair on a can of Coke. The chairman reopened the hearings. He flew back to Washington and got to the house at 10 that night and sat at the kitchen table in a shirt wet at the collar. Virginia sat across from him. She said, "Do you want to withdraw?" He said, "No." She said, "Tell me why." He said, "Because I will not allow them to take what they will take if I do." He did not cry. He did not raise his voice. He sat at the table and looked at the grain of the wood. The hearing reopened on the 11th of October. Every camera in the city was in the room. The witness went first. She was calm. She testified for 8 hours. Her voice did not shake. She did not look at him, and he did not look at her. He went second. The chairman called him at 5 minutes to 9 in the evening. He took the oath. His wife sat behind him in the second row, in blue again, her handbag in her lap. The chairman asked him a question. He said the statement was false. The chairman asked him another. He said he had nothing more to say about the specifics, that he would not address them again. He said he had something else he wanted to say. The chairman nodded. He leaned toward the microphone. He said, "This is a circus." He said, "It is a national disgrace." He said, "And from my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas." He said, "You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the United States Senate rather than hung from a tree." The chairman did not interrupt. The room was as quiet as it had ever been. He said he was a victim of this process, and he was not going to sit there and gratify it. He stopped. He looked at the chairman. He looked at the wood of the table. That night he did not go home. He slept on the couch in his lawyer's office on K Street, his coat folded under his head, his shoes on. At 3 in the morning he got up and stood at the bathroom sink with his hands on the cold porcelain and looked at his face in the mirror. His eyes were red. The collar of his shirt was yellow where the sweat had dried. He looked at himself for a long time. He said it to the man in the mirror. He said it once. He said it under his breath. "Lord, take hate out of my heart." He turned off the light. He went back to the couch. He did not sleep. The Senate voted on the 15th, 52 in favor, 48 against. The oath was administered on the South Lawn on the 18th of October. Justice White read it. Virginia held the Bible. A wind out of the northwest took the leaves off the magnolia. He raised his right hand and said the words. At the public investiture 5 days later, he walked in behind the marshal, took the second oath, and sat down at the far left end of the bench, the chair of the junior justice. He placed his hands on the wood. The wood was cold. That evening, they drove home to Virginia. He drove. Neither of them spoke for the first 20 minutes. The sun went down over the river. At a stoplight, she said, "I want you to do something for me." He said, "Yes, ma'am," she said. "When this is done, when you are finished, we are going to buy a motor home and we are going to drive it to every Walmart parking lot in this country." He looked at her. "Everyone?" "Everyone." The light changed. He put the car in gear. After a mile, he said, "Okay." She said, "You promise?" He said, "I promise." They drove the rest of the way home in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, the motion light at the fence came on. The yard was empty. His chambers were on the 3rd floor, east wing. The window looked out at the Library of Congress across First Street. He stopped asking questions during oral argument. He had asked them his first year. By the 5th year, he had stopped. He sat at the far left end of the bench and he listened. When the clerks asked him why, he said he had read the briefs. He said he did not need to hear his own voice in the room in order to think. He worked with a fountain pen, blue-black ink, a yellow legal pad, his feet crossed under the desk. He drafted every opinion in longhand first. The clerks typed the drafts. He revised them with the pen. They retyped them. A signed opinion went through 9 drafts on average and never fewer than 4. He was not fast. He did not aim to be fast. The Kilo case came up in 2005. The question was whether the government could take a woman's house by eminent domain and give it to a private developer. The woman's name was Suzette Kilo, New London, Connecticut. He listened. He did not ask a question. The court ruled 5-4 in favor of the city. He dissented. He wrote it in longhand at his desk with the window open and the traffic coming in. He wrote that something had gone seriously awry with the court's interpretation of the Constitution. Citizens were safe from the government in their homes, he wrote, but the homes themselves were not. The losses would fall disproportionately on poor communities. The court had erased the public use clause from the Constitution of the United States. At 6, he put on his coat, walked down the 3 flights of marble stairs and out the side door, and sat on a bench in the plaza and looked at the Capitol dome. A sewing plant in Tupelo. A house in Pinpoint with no power for 4 days. He did not speak. He stood up. He drove home. At home, he picked the pen back up. The Grutter opinion came down in June of 2003. Sandra Day O'Connor wrote it, 5-4. The University of Michigan Law School could go on using race in admissions, and the preferences should be unnecessary in 25 years. He dissented. He wrote that racial classifications were unconstitutional. The law school did not have a compelling interest in maintaining a critical mass of black students. Its admissions program was a naked racial balancing act, and a great injustice, he wrote, was being done in his name. He was 55 years old. In the abortion case, Dobbs, in June of 2022, he wrote a concurrence. The doctrine the court had long used to find rights the Constitution never named, as he wrote, had no real basis in the text, and every ruling built on it should be revisited. The same week, in a gun case, Bruin, he wrote for the court that a gun law could stand only if it matched the nation's history. He was 74. The Harvard case, Students for Fair Admissions, was argued on Halloween of 2022. He sat one seat from the center now, where seniority had carried him. He asked one question. He asked the lawyer for Harvard what the endpoint of race-conscious admissions would be. The lawyer did not give him a straight answer. He wrote a separate concurrence. He wrote that he was writing to offer an originalist defense of the colorblind Constitution. The 14th Amendment, he wrote, meant what it said. The Constitution did not see race, and did not allow the government to see race. The word was not his. More than a century earlier, in a case called Plessy, a justice named Harlan had used it first. Our Constitution is colorblind, he had written, and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. He had written it in dissent. He had written it alone. 7 justices held that a state could separate the races by law. Harlan told the 7 they were wrong. He was more than 40 years in the ground before the court came to stand where he stood. Thomas knew the line. He put Harlan in the opinion. He had written once that he was quite comfortable in the company he kept. He kept writing. He wrote that the experiment begun by Grutter had failed. He wrote that the time was up. He was 75 the day the opinion came down. He sat in his chambers after the reading. A clerk had brought him a glass of water. It was still on the desk an hour later. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out the thin envelope. The handwriting on the front was in pencil, leaning right. The slit in the top had been made with a thumbnail 40 years before. The flap had never been folded down. He read the sheet. He read it again. He folded it and put it back and closed the drawer. He drank the water. The motorhome came east on US 280 at the end of April of 2026. He had been driving for 6 days. Virginia had fallen asleep at a rest stop outside Columbus and not woken when he started the engine again. He crossed into Georgia at 11 in the morning. The color of the dirt at the shoulder changed from the rust of the uplands to the red of the coastal plain. He took the exit at Ludowici and drove east on GA 57 through country he had not driven in 30 years. The towns were smaller than they had been. Some of them were not towns anymore. A gas station he had stopped at with his brother in 1967 was still there. The same family 4 generations on, the paint on the sign peeling. He turned south onto a county road that did not have a number. The road was paved for the first mile, and then it was not. The field was at the end of the road. He stopped the motorhome at the fence line, turned off the engine, set the parking brake, and got out. Virginia did not get out with him. She sat in the cab and watched. He walked through the gate. The field was 40 acres of dirt held together by pine stumps and memory. The grandfather had bought it in 1957 and farmed it until 1979 and leased it after that to a neighbor for as long as the neighbor could work it. The neighbor had died some years back. The field had been fallow since. Clarence walked it from the eastern fence to the western fence and back. The dirt under his boots was the same red clay it had been in 1958. He walked to the place where the first stake had been. The stake was gone, the post hole filled. He walked to the place where the second stake had been. Same. On the way back, he saw a piece of raw steel in the dirt where the plow line had run. He bent and picked it up. One of the welding blocks the grandfather had cut to fit his boots to the pedals. The steel had rusted, and the cut edges were still square. He put it in the pocket of his coat. He stood between the two places where the stakes had been. He looked east. The morning light fell long across the field. He stood still for a long time. He was 77 years old. On the way back to the gate, he stopped at a low rise where 3 live oaks stood together. The graves were under the oaks. The grandfather's was on the left. Myers Anderson, 1907 to 1983. Below the name it said, "A job worth doing." The grandmother's was on the right. Christine Anderson, 1911 to 1992. Below her name it said, "And let whosoever will come." A third stone, smaller between them, for a daughter who had died in infancy in 1942, before Clarence was born. He stood at the foot of the 3 stones. He did not kneel. He took the envelope out of the inside breast pocket of his coat. He looked at it one more time. He bent at the waist and placed it on the ground in front of the grandfather's stone. He weighted it with a small flat piece of granite that lay at the base of the stone and that had not been placed there by any hand he knew. He stood up. He walked back to the motorhome. Virginia had not moved. He got in. He closed the door. He sat with his hands on the wheel. He started the engine. He backed out of the gate onto the county road. He drove. At the end of the county road, he turned onto GA 57 and drove west. He did not look back. He drove.